Well, welcome back to AED Summit Live here in Orlando. We are on day 2 of streaming, and it's been a good show so far. What are the thoughts on the show from you guys?
There's over 3,000 folks here that are networking, promoting the heavy equipment industry, and talking about how to continue to be successful going forward. So there's a lot of excitement in the room, and it's great to be a part of it.
So I should do, go ahead, I'm sorry.
In Orlando, this is what we do. Our constituents welcome major conventions and make memories for families. So we're so excited to have AED here. I know this is one of the favorite locations for you all to have it, whether over in Disney or here near Universal. And I hope everybody takes, it's mostly business, but I hope everybody takes a little poolside time, gets a nice meal, and for those of you who brought your families, they're going to have a really good time while we're here. So we're thrilled to have you. We hope you have an amazing stay, and we welcome you back anytime.
Yeah. So you guys are some good-looking fellas here. Can we put some names with who we're talking to?
That's what I was going to say. We'll do proper introductions. Thank you, Representative Soto, and we have Emily Foster here from National Immigration Forum. Thank you guys for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
It's our honor. Thanks for having us on the podcast.
Absolutely. So can you give us an overview of what National Immigration Forum does and what problems we're addressing?
Sure. Thanks so much for that question, Brian. So National Immigration Forum was founded in '82 and seeks to create a shared vision of immigration in America. And so we actually think that America can be a nation of laws, a nation of grace, and continue to be a beacon of opportunity. And so the forum actually realizes we can't talk to people that already agree about immigration. We have to actually build new allies, bring on new allies into the conversation. And so we intentionally work with folks, leaders in business, faith, law enforcement, and national security as a way to highlight the importance of immigration to those communities and ultimately urge Congress to act on bipartisan solutions to update our laws.
Interesting.
So what is the current channel for someone to come into our country and get a job? And Rick and I are both tradesmen, so we are well aware of this labor force shortage that we're suffering from. How does someone come over here and get a job doing what we do right now?
If I may, let's start by setting the table a little bit. So we have the infrastructure law in full swing, so a huge spike in demand for heavy equipment to build bridges and ports and airports. We're talking about a $1.2 trillion bill that passed into law, and we're only on year 4. And even after the end of it, we're going to see that money still flowing because it takes a while to get down to the states and to the locals.
Sure.
So this should be 7 to 10 years of elevated infrastructure construction. So the demand is high. We also saw through the CHIPS Act and the IRA a spike in factory construction, especially for microchip manufacturing and other tech manufacturing here in the nation. So we're building more factories right now. Then, of course, with you add an agriculture and a housing shortage where we need more housing, we need to make sure Americans have training for the jobs that they want to need. That's still not going to be enough.
Yes.
I think that's what people have to realize is it's not going to be enough. And if we don't have enough workers, then you have inflation. Then you have our ability to not meet the demands of housing. Then you can't build these factories to make enough goods to keep prices down. You can't build the roads to improve the commutes or feed a nation. And so it's important to set the table in that not only do we need every American to work in all these industries, but it's still not going to be enough to meet the demand. And if we cut off growth, you could get into a recession, you could have inflation, and you'll certainly have far less equipment, heavy equipment that people will need, which will directly affect this industry. So how do you approach it? Well, one, foundations like the AED Foundation putting together blueprints as a well-established, non-partisan organization has an ability to work with folks on both sides of the aisle, state, local, federal, to give ideas. And in Congress, seems like nothing ever is going to happen until something happens.
Sure.
And it could be like a lightning strike. You could wait, just to give you an idea, the infrastructure law, 70 years since the last one.
Yeah.
It seemed like it was never going to happen, and then boom. And now we're in the post-infrastructure law world here, which is helping drive some of this demand and, of course, improve people's commutes and upgrade the nation. And so you can't get frustrated our forefathers meant for it to be hard to pass laws for 340 million people.
Absolutely.
There are
So-
advantages of slow change.
Yeah, and so you got to constantly prepare because you don't know. But this, I can tell you, the two biggest issues going into this Congress: inflation and immigration, border security, which are, by the way, interrelated. Because if you don't have enough workers, then that spikes inflation and it limits growth, by the way. And so getting common sense solutions where there's lawful pathways, as well as making sure there's apprenticeships and other programs for Americans to get the skills they need to participate in these jobs. All this can be done in a balance. But the key is we have to keep politics at the door. Because, look, you have a lot of people who are hurting because of, you saw inflation spike during COVID, and people were stuck at home, and those are going to have long-term effects. And so as people are looking to get their share of prosperity in this nation, it's easy to be frustrated. But I can tell you, immigrants are not the problem. Now, we need lawful pathways, but the issue is that we need to make sure we're continuing to make things here in America and make sure to have pro-growth policies that continue to keep our economy running. And immigration is part of it. So are these laws that I just mentioned. And so is keeping costs down for materials,
Yes.
which is another big thing that we're going to be looking at. All these play a role in the growth that we need to keep AED and your members well in this growth that we're going to need all this heavy equipment for.
And just to kind of piggyback off of that, in our trade, the excavation industry, the average age is right around the 56-year mark. And so I don't think a lot of the general public really realize we're 5 to 10 years from seeing a massive, like we're on the cusp of the true workforce shortage that we're about to see. And to think that we're somehow going to just divert some kids over from the college path and that'll take care of it, or maybe some of these technological advances, that'll take care of it. This is an all hands on deck situation. And so just agreeing with you, immigration is going to play a key component in trying to replace some of that workforce. And so, I'll go ahead.
And one thing I could tell you is, for instance, in all three counties I represent here, Orange, Osceola, and Polk counties, they have industrial high schools, right? They have trade high schools. So you could start as a freshman in high school learning skills for apprenticeships, from water infrastructure to carpentry to electricity to you name it, ironworking.
Yeah.
And then you get the basics of it, and then you usually go into an apprenticeship program or to our local community colleges. So the infrastructure is there. We have to continue to work both in the private sector, the public sector, and literally in our culture generally to let people know, like, there's trade schools in just about every county across this nation. And I've been to apprenticeship days where we get a lot of kids going in to learn about it, but then they don't go that path. And so, and by the way, if you go through this path, you can make anywhere from median incomes of $60,000 to $80,000 to well over $100,000 a year without student debt, right?
Getting
On top of
paid
it.
to learn.
Yep.
Yep.
And now these are arduous jobs then. These are jobs that are physical, that take a mental toughness. And so not everybody is meant to do that work because they
Absolutely.
just don't have it in them to have the grit to do it. But for those who can, there is the infrastructure there for them to learn these things. And I think you need both. You need more Americans to go into these apprenticeships, and you need immigrant labor, because that's not going to be enough if we want to continue to grow a nation of 340 million people.
Exactly, Congressman. So the Department of Labor estimates that the industry is going to need another 150,000 technicians over the next 10 years. And AED and its members does a fabulous job of recruiting American-born talent and developing them through apprenticeship programs, but that's not going to be enough. The technician jobs are growing at a rate of 9%, but the rest of jobs is 4%, and so you really need access to foreign-born talent in order to meet that gap. But here's the problem. Congress hasn't really done meaningful immigration reform since 1990. And think about what's happened since then. The first text message was actually sent in 1992.
Yeah.
And important for this industry, actually, if you think back, 1998 is when EPA did their first emissions rules for off-highway diesel engines. And so the system has not kept up with the needs of today, and we continue to have visa quotas and limitations, which in the end make it harder for employers to get access to foreign-born talent that they desperately need to fill these job vacancies. And so it needs to be both. Continue to develop the domestic talent, but also get access to foreign-born talent that's qualified, that wants to be here, contribute to our communities and to our economy. And so that's where I expect members like Congressman Soto to help Congress. And what we want, our message to the incoming Trump administration and to Congress is to work together. Certainly enforcement is really important. We need to strengthen our borders, strengthen national security, but we also need to update and modernize our immigration laws, because that will be really key to helping at the border, because a lot of the chaos at the border is because we haven't updated our laws since 1990. And so if we do both, and we know there's bipartisan support for both, then it actually will start restoring order and allow our economy to really thrive at all cylinders, and the equipment industry in particular will finally get access to talent that they currently don't have access to.
Here, here. And so you could count on my vote. And, there's several pieces of legislation. You have the Farm Workforce Modernization Act that would help with our farm workers. You have Dream and Promise Act for a lot of these folks, kids who've been here since they were 1 year old or 2 years old. And then things like essential workers that you were talking about, act with Lloyd Smucker from Pennsylvania, who's my classmate, among other bills that are out there to help with visa reform. I think there can be some compromise in that. One of the reasons we have unlawful immigration is because there aren't enough legal pathways.
Yeah.
And there's a demand for workers. So we have an economy that is built on having some of these folks come here. We just don't have a system to allow them to get here.
Yeah.
So it just creates this huge incentive to come here unlawfully. Mm-hmm. And then, oh, by the way, we needed you anyway, but we also don't want to, not we, but some folks don't want to create a pathway, but then it puts people in limbo. And by the way, that depresses wages for Americans generally.
Absolutely.
Because then you have these folks who are here in the shadows and they'll take whatever they can get.
Yes.
And that depresses construction wages, which then hurts a lot of Americans who are working in these similar industries. One thing I think that AED can help out with, in addition to immigration, is in middle schools, before kids are going to high school, going to career days, speaking to kids, because a lot of these folks are making career decisions as early as middle school. It feels crazy, right?
Yeah.
But you may remember, because you're all a little younger than me, but probably old enough to have to take that exam where you'd tell you well, you're good at this and that and this. And
oh, yeah.
So these things were starting to give in 7th and 8th grade, and kids really are making decisions about whether to go to their technical school for high school in 8th grade or 7th grade. And so a lot of times people look at post-high school or in the middle high school, and for a lot of these decisions, for them to be on the fast track where they could get their license to be an electrician or an iron worker by 20, 19 years old, the fast track starts in 7th or 8th grade. So one of the things that I encourage you all to do, because I go to these apprenticeship days too with all these 8th graders in Orange County here, middle schoolers, encourage them on the track, and have career professionals who are electricians who talk about what they do, what money they're making, what their lifestyle is, and how, if you like working with your hands, which a lot of people do. Some people bounce off the walls in the high school, right?
Yeah.
They're like, I can't sit here. I need to be outside. Don't put me in a cubicle, right? Please.
Yeah.
So this is something that that encourage you all to consider working on. And I'll be doing it in my area, but I only have one small part of a large nation, and it takes letting more young people know about these opportunities. And I think as people realize that and realize these opportunities, they'll be less animus about the idea that we also, in addition to every American, are going to need immigrants to help us with this. As people know more opportunities, there's less economic frustration, which there's a lot of that right now post-COVID.
So, question for you. Obviously, this is a pretty hot topic throughout America with the immigration reform. How much of the workforce, if this really starts to combat, how much are they actually making up of the workforce that's out there now today?
Yeah, so it depends on the industry. There are some industries in construction and hospitality and agriculture, where it actually can be up to 80%. But immigrants as a whole are about 20% of all workers. But given the industries that they work in, they really are critical to propelling our economy. And so one of the reasons why we're here today, and something we're excited about, is we are launching a research report that looks at what are the current pathways for the heavy equipment industry to recruit foreign-born talent. Spoiler alert, unfortunately there are none.
Yeah.
And what are some ideas that could get bipartisan support,
Yep.
and really help to ensure that all those industries get access to the workers that they need and that our economy continues to thrive.
So I have some national numbers for you, and I agree these are probably low because not everybody reports, right? But for agriculture, 44.7%.
Wow.
Immigrant workers. Construction, 38.2%. Transportation and warehousing, 36.3%. General services, 32.9%. And wholesale trade, 30.7%.
Wow.
And those are probably low, right?
Those are
But,
low,
basically a third or more. And in a few industries like agriculture, there's not a lot of Americans who want to do the picking part of it.
Absolutely.
There are folks who will go into the tractors. They're longtime 4th, 5th, 7th generation farmers, but they're not the ones picking the strawberries, right?
Absolutely.
It is backbreaking work. And so some of these, there's been more traditional immigrant labor than others. And so I think that's kind of, again, gives you a context of what could happen if we just pull the rug out. But we also have an equal duty, because one of the reasons immigration is a hot button issue is because the economy is inefficient. Not every American who could be working in some of these industries, especially in construction and warehousing, are two really hot ones right now. With how many things did you buy that got delivered to your doorstep over this last
Absolutely,
week or
yep.
two,
Yes.
or your spouses, right? Like
a big impact.
a lot, right? So those are some of the new jobs, and Americans, rightly so, want to maximize the number of jobs they can have there. It's still not going to be enough, but I think the animosity behind this will thaw as more people have more efficient pathways to get into these jobs too.
I also think there's going to be a lot of that animosity is going to dissolve, as we just talked about. Let's take construction, because that's what we know. If our average age of the workforce is 56, it means we're going to lose about half of our people in the next 10 years. And now there's the potential that we're also going to pull the rug out from another 30-ish% of our workforce. That's going to be devastating to our industry. And so
Cause a recession.
when you want to come build a commercial building, or you want to build a house and it's 4 times the price it was 10 years ago, I think people are going to be a lot more receptive to looking at alternatives to fixing that problem. So that being said, we're in this kind of weird time where we have an incoming administration who's kind of talked a lot about a narrative of deportation. But we're also collectively all recognizing that this is a major issue. How do you kind of navigate these waters, and what's the strategy?
So it could be everything from an opportunity to a total and utter disaster.
Yes.
Because it's uncertain, right? But there'll be attempts to improve border security. And I can tell you, we as Democrats think technology is one of the solutions to that. Sensors. So because walls get knocked down, they get tunneled under. But technology nowadays, I mean, we have sensor towers that can spot any movement within a 3-mile radius.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then we have our Customs and Border Protection folks do interventions to apprehend, right? And it becomes more efficient. So that's where I see the future of border security being, in drones and in sensor towers, and then using our Customs and Border Protection to actually intervene and apprehend. But it'll take a little bit of leap of faith, because a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, like, how could a tower in the middle of the desert spot
Right.
people? But then again, look at your cell phone, look at your computer. You just got your Amazon coming in through a drone that dropped it off.
Yes.
Like,
And you're tracking it in the air on the way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it is all startlingly fast and new and technology wise. And then so I think we could see improvement in border security, and we refer to it as border awareness across the southern border and the northern border, by the way.
Yeah.
And then from there, in a package like that, if we can get it done sensibly, there may be opportunities to say, look, farm workers, Dream and Promise Act, expanded visas, especially for a lot of the manual labor and apprenticeship stuff could be a big help around here. I work with a lot of the building trades, and in Central Florida we're a diverse area, so the building trades are very diverse as well. And in agriculture, you could see an immediate spike in food prices if we don't do it, and then a long-term collision and collapse of the growth machine. Remember 2008 to 2012, it seemed like everything was going gangbusters, and then boom.
Yeah.
And commercial construction takes so long to get going again. Infrastructure is going to power forward, but it'll just mean that projects will be more delayed. People need less equipment because things are going slower. So all these things it's an opportunity if we could get it done right. And I know that we want to make sure that we could get border security, legal pathways, so that people can come here lawfully, so we don't have this concern about unlawful, unvetted immigrants, and continue to have growth going for all Americans to be able to enjoy.
So are there some high-level proposed changes to onboarding foreign-born talent that you could share? What are some of the avenues you guys are pursuing to get people into the country from a workforce perspective?
So there'll be an attempt to do a reconciliation bill. We're going to do a little deep dive for a second because this is how the Congress works.
Yeah.
Reconciliation, a majority can do 2 of those a year, and they have to reduce the debt or deficit, and the filibuster does not apply to them. So some of the biggest laws have been passed that way. There'll be an attempt by the Republicans to do a reconciliation bill for border security. And for us to join it, there would have to be a balanced ledger. There'd have to be some legal pathways opened up. Now, if they didn't want to go that route and just did a large bipartisan bill, then you need a simple majority in the House, but you need 60 votes in the Senate. And so the first question will be whether they go the reconciliation route and go it alone, and then we won't have that much input on that.
Okay.
Or whether they want to do it in a bipartisan fashion in a large border security bill that to get Democrats on board, you would need some legal pathways to at least visas and residency. Citizenship is important, but most people are they don't want to have to look over their shoulders constantly, right? And we're flexible on that. I'm the deputy chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. I'm the number 2 person in a 42-member caucus that immigration is one of our biggest issues because it affects a lot of our constituents and a lot of us personally. And so the first thing will be whether they go it alone route, which we won't have a lot of input in, and it'll probably be one-sided, but we'll see. You never know. Or whether they're going to go the bipartisan route. And then there's a question about whether they're going to do it in one giant bill and add in the tax stuff along with it, or whether it's 2 bills. If it's all in one bill, it makes it even harder because we have a deficit that's like $1.5 trillion a year right now.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so we've capped spending over the last 2 years after a lot of spending during the COVID crisis because, we were heading for free fall, like the Paycheck Protection Program that so many employers at AED, your members, got to utilize to keep Americans at work. But then we reduced spending to cap it at 1% for the 2024 and 2025 budgets. And there's still a huge deficit because the revenue has collapsed. And where this also gets complicated is that the national debt is so big now it's affecting construction loans and mortgage rates because the national debt, those bonds are competing with construction bonds and with mortgage-backed securities. That has not ever happened before. So you have all this. So are they going to do it in one big bill? Then that makes it harder for us to support because of all these other issues going on. Or is it 2 bills that would make it a little easier? And will it be bipartisan or will it be a go-it-alone reconciliation package? So that may be a little complicated, but that is kind of the if-ands and the roads that the paths that the Congress can take over this next term. And certain ways will lend itself to more bipartisan support. Other ways, literally, we'd be mostly shut out of it. So what's going to happen, we'll see. But I know that I would prefer for it to be bipartisan. Most of the bills, when we had the Democratic majority and the House, Senate, and the presidency were bipartisan. You have the infrastructure law and the CHIPS Act and the PACT Act. We used it for the Inflation Reduction Act for the American Rescue Plan. And so it's not that we haven't used it either. It's just we try to have some of the big bills at least be bipartisan. So I'm hopeful we'll at least see a combination of some big bills being bipartisan, even if they go it alone on some of the reconciliation stuff. So, we want to give you the straight facts here and give you an idea of, you're going to be hearing a lot about those potential vehicles across the internet, across the news.
Absolutely.
And so I want to make sure your members are familiar with the terminology they're going to hear.
Is this going to be something that's like a fast change for all the proposed, or is it going to be something that takes a long time to drag out? It's going to be a slow play.
President Trump is being inaugurated on Monday, and he is planning a lot of what they call like day one actions, focused on enforcement. But as the congressman alluded to, that requires money. So that's where Congress needs to step in and appropriate the money to be able to implement a lot of those changes that he's going to order through executive orders. The other thing that the public should be aware about is you're going to hear a lot of announcements, but the agencies actually have to then implement it. So you're not going to see kind of that change. You're going to hear about a lot of change right away.
But no immediate action.
But
Okay.
no, well, some action, because this is the President Trump's second time in office, so he kind of knows how to do this and
Sure.
and can get things moving much faster. But at the end of the day, there is going to be a big focus on enforcement. But President Trump is a businessman. He's going to be keeping an eye on inflation and an eye on the economy. And if it starts to tick up, then I think there will be an opportunity to then address some of these issues. In fact, we know that 80% of the undocumented actually have been here for 10 years or longer.
Wow.
They've been part of our churches, part of our communities, and we want them to be able to stay here and continue contributing. And so that's why I think President Trump and Republicans and Democrats in Congress will come together and enact some changes. Comprehensive is needed. That's probably unlikely, but even if we can get some permanent status for key long-term immigrants, that will go a long way in bringing some certainty and reducing some of the chaos around our system.
And so she presents what is kind of the three-legged stool of issues that were the biggest issues in the election: inflation, immigration, and tariffs. And by the way, they all affect each other.
Yes.
So
100%.
it'll be interesting to see how sensitive people are to inflation, and that can affect the extent of immigration and tariffs. So as a policy person, I'm like fascinated about how this is all going to play out.
Yes.
And I always wish and hope for the best for my constituents and for the country going forward. Executive orders can direct agencies, but she's correct in that it takes a while to implement some of this stuff. And the budgets, other than reconciliation, will have to be bipartisan. One of the interesting factors is we have the second smallest majority in U.S. history in the U.S. House.
Really?
So there are 220 Republicans and 215 Democrats. So it's like that. And by the way, with the vacancies right now, it's actually 217 Republicans, 215 Democrats.
Wow.
So one vote
One neck and neck.
can decide any bill over the next couple months until these special elections play out. And then 3 votes out of 435 members can
Will make the
decide
difference.
anything. Because so now regular budgets will be bipartisan and most bills will be bipartisan. The only thing that can literally be done by one party is through this reconciliation process, which is why I brought it up, and tax and border security with potentially efforts to get in immigration would be the major ones we would see. So
Yeah.
but that's the beauty of the country. You just don't know what's going to happen and you
Yeah.
prepare for everything.
So
Yeah.
the changes you guys are always working on, what's the impact from this administration that's coming in now for you guys?
Well, we just passed 3 very pro-growth laws that you all are very familiar with because it's boosting, first, the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act is boosting factory construction for everything from clean energy to microchips to other tech manufacturing. So we see a huge spike over the last couple of years in factory construction, which you all are building them, right? You're supplying the equipment to build them, right? And your members are helping build them. And then you have the infrastructure law, which is all over the nation. And your folks are helping supply the heavy equipment to do all these things, from ports to airports to rural broadband to highways, you name it, right? Now you'll have a new administration that'll be implementing the rest of it. But there's been some talks about repealing those things. Not the infrastructure law as much, but you could take some of the money away to pay for things. So it wouldn't be a total repeal because a lot of the money's been spent, but it could be a partial repeal. Most of the CHIPS Act money is already out the door, so that's the least likely to see a lot of changes. Then the Inflation Reduction Act, that's a 10-year law. So a lot of the big new nuclear plants, solar plants, wind, anything dealing with electric vehicle manufacturing and EV batteries, all that can be affected by this if you take away some of that money, right? And so now, and then it could affect a long-term competitiveness. We saw last time the American auto industry slacked on innovation in the 70s, and Japan ate our lunch, right? So it's like we got to continue to innovate. That's just, the world's going to beat us if we don't do it, right? We just got to, it's scary, but we just got to keep doing it, right?
Absolutely.
That's just how you maintain your competitiveness. So how these laws are overseen and implemented and whether money's taken away will affect some of the demand in these areas. And then you have housing. Housing, we have a national housing shortage. So that'll continue to drive demand to increase supply. But if you take away the workers and use tariffs to increase the price of materials, even with a demand, you may not. And then if you have construction loans, especially for apartments, be hindered because of an even more surging national debt, it could put us in a place where we can't get the loans to build more housing, yet we desperately need it. People are just going to be angry and out of luck. And
You're artificially keeping demand down.
Wow. And rent spikes and housing spikes. For a homeowner, it's good. But for the millions of Americans who are trying to enter the housing market, or who are millions of Americans who are renting, they'll get caught in it, just like we saw from 2020 to 2023, 40% essentially increase in rents and housing prices. And while that's great for homeowners, it's tough for everybody else, and it certainly is not going to help your industry out because you all do well when new housing is being built, because then people need that heavy equipment. So housing will be one to watch too, and whether anything's done or not, I think we need a national housing plan to empower the private sector to build more housing. This isn't about public housing. It's about making mortgages cheaper. It's about making sure the supplies come in, that we build more in the United States, that we have training programs and incentivize more housing to be built, especially starter homes, because those entry homes are how most people get into the market. And of course, that's the biggest asset that most American families have. It's their home. So that'll be an interesting one to watch too.
Well, my final question, Emily, is the immigration study you conducted. Is that something that's accessible for AED members?
Yes, it's actually a press statement's going to come out. It's going to be linked in the statement. It's also available on the National Immigration Forum's website. But we hope folks will take a look at it because, as I mentioned, it will also look at the current pathways to be able to recruiting foreign-born technicians, which again, there are none, and so we go into why those are inadequate, but also solutions that Congress can consider as they look to expand labor mobility pathways to recruit this very important talent.
Great. Well, Congressman Soto, Emily, thank you guys so much for your time, and thank you for taking on a really tough topic and trying to address it. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. We needed a deep dive today. We got it.
Yeah.
The world is complex. I didn't create it that way. That's just the way it is. And so we want to make sure your members have all the facts and see how this will affect the future of our economy, which is going to affect all of us.
We appreciate it.
Thank
you guys again for watching. Be sure to stick around. We'll be back with you in about 15 minutes for yet another live here at AED Summit.